Sitting down and actually making art can be a little troublesome sometimes. Oh, sure, it's what we want to do, what we yearn for. Sometimes I used to sit and watch the clock tick away in school just to get home and draw. But then sometimes when I actually got there, I didn't quite know what to do. And this still happens today, something that I still run into personally, and certainly something that I've had students run into over the years, and other people in the communities that I'm involved in now. There are a lot of strategies, however, that can help with this sort of thing, or with just following through and working on the things that you want to. For this episode, I want to focus on artistic rituals, the habits you can build or work toward that create a comfortable and known environment for diving into your work. Well, my name is Zach, and welcome to episode 90 of the podcast. As usual, I'm going to explore what I mean by the topic, then go over how this might actually affect you as an artist, though I'm going to start adding some of my own closing thoughts and updates at the end of each episode, so please stay tuned for that. As we get started, do you have any artistic rituals? Things that you do at the beginning of each sketchbook or painting session, or something you do when you finish? Let us know in the comments below. Well, what do I mean by art rituals? This could, of course, be a quite broad topic. Rituals, in this sense at least, are habits you have formed or acts you carry out before or after you engage in making your art. They could be as simple as cleaning up your space at either end, and could be as complicated as making the same meal, cup of tea, or finding the perfect episode to stream in the background. These habits are often not complicated, but they serve an important purpose. They pave the way for making the art by constructing a positive, and perhaps more importantly, a known and comfortable workspace. Well, it seems only logical then to spend a couple minutes talking about the benefits of these art rituals, before going into some examples, and then, of course, at the end, because I'm me, I have to go into the dangers of these things. Not necessarily because they are bad by nature, but because that's how my mind works. I always try to look at both sides of things. Not necessarily for playing devil's advocate, but just because I think it's beneficial to get as full a picture of anything that you're talking about and discussing as you possibly can. Certainly one of the biggest benefits of artistic rituals is simply consistency. When you start your art making process the same way every single time, it makes it pretty easy to slide into it. You know what you're doing, you know how you're going to get started, perhaps you even know how you're going to finish things. Imagine if you always take a break halfway through or when you're finished with whatever project you're working on, and you go treat yourself to a little bit of ice cream or something. This might sound very silly, but we do this often with children when we want them to do something that they don't particularly want to do. Maybe your kid needs to clean their room and you're like, yeah, you know what, like once you finish cleaning your room, you can go play in the backyard with the sprinkler for a few minutes, or you can have an Oreo or whatever. These kinds of things are, traits and habits that we use to train children, and we use them to train animals sometimes. And you know what? Sometimes as an artist, we've got to find methodologies that are similar. Hopefully, not in a condescending way, but things that help us to consistently come back to whatever it is we're making. For me, a lot of times it's mostly just getting set up. I like to make sure I have something to drink, generally something hot. I like coffee or tea. I will often set my water off to the side. I like to make sure that my workspace is prepared. If I'm stressed about engaging in whatever drawing it is, it's often not stressful at all for me to sit down and do the prep work. So I can actually create a situation where it's easier for me to slide into that work because I have an idea of what my consistent practice looks like at the beginning. So I'll come down, I'll kind of push my stuff to the side, figure out which sketchbook I'm working on. If I'm working with my brush pens, I'll figure out which colors I'm using. That process is really consistent for me, and it makes it really easy. I kind of do it without really thinking about it, and then a couple minutes later, I'm ready to go, and I feel more comfortable. If my heart rate was up, my heart rate has often come down. That consistency is, for me, a huge benefit when it comes to making my art. And it's why just the simple ritual of making sure I have something hot to drink and I have my workspace set up the way that I like is really, really lovely. I'm not as consistent as I should be about making sure I clean up at the end. In fact, I usually come down to engage in some manner of art making process, and then it's like, oh crap, I gotta spend 10 minutes cleaning first. That's where podcasts and audiobooks come in. You got to find your spot for everything. Another really significant benefit to artistic rituals is that they remove the hurdle of starting. And I kind of mentioned that a little bit before in the first of these, and that's because these are all kind of entwined with one another. But I often talk about you need to lower the barrier to entry. You need to make it as easy as possible to slide into these kinds of creative activities. From the outside, this seems really silly because as artists and creatives, of course, we want to make things, we want to be creative. But there's often levels of stress that we put on ourselves, expectations that we have. We don't want to be disappointed, we don't want to disappoint other people if we're working on things for them. And all of that kind of rears its ugly head, and it makes it a little bit more intimidating to slide into what we want to work on. And this seems to be a pretty ubiquitous thing in artists. We psych ourselves out. We make ourselves anxious about the things that we love and the things that we want to engage in most. I wish I had a really simple solution for this, but I don't. One that I do have, though, is using things like artistic rituals to make the known quantities of moving into an art session higher than the unknown quantities. And so if you have a ritual about prepping your drink, cleaning your space, maybe it's even going for a run or a workout or, meditating, sitting out on your deck or your front porch for a few minutes. Whatever it is, especially if it's something that brings you joy or calms you down, those are going to be really wonderful things because your brain's going to start associating the art making process with those things, and the anxiety-inducing components are going to start to melt away. In my experience, both as artist and teacher, I've never found a way to eliminate all of the friction. There is always going to be some amount of friction getting involved in your art making process, doing anything creative. I think largely this comes down to the fact that when you are being creative, there's always a possibility of failure, whether on a really small or a larger scale. If you're doing the same repetitive task all the time, there's a much, smaller chance that things are going to go poorly. I think back to times in my life when the job that I've worked has been pretty simple, especially when it's been physical stuff. A lot of the landscaping and arbor work that I did, the ability to mess things up was really low because the task was really simple. However, when I'm working on creative things, when I was building lesson plans, when I was writing, emails to try to persuade people to do something for the school, when I'm trying to write stuff for my novel, when I'm putting scripts together for videos, there's so many points at which any one of those things can fail. And that makes it a lot more stressful because over time, you do have failures. And if you stop after those failures and you don't keep moving forward, then they become more pronounced in your mind. So having anything that removes hurdles to getting involved in your artwork is going to be a lovely, beneficial thing for you. And artistic rituals are just a wonderful way to do that. They create consistency and they create a level of known facets. So more of the process is predictable, more of the time is predictable, and that makes it more comforting. And hopefully it makes it easier to slide into the process. Sometimes the ritual itself is tantalizing enough to get you started. Maybe you only let yourself drink your special kind of tea or use a special mug when you sit down to work on art. Maybe you have specific shows that you watch or music that you listen to. Maybe you fire up your record player, but you only listen to records when you're working on art. That can actually make it exciting enough that the art itself isn't even pulling you into the creative process. It is the habit. It is this artistic ritual. If you have the self-control to do this, this is actually a really wonderful thing. Maybe it's the space that you get to work in. There are a lot of ways to look at this. I have this special teapot that is the old school variety. I think it's made of cast iron, where you actually have to boil the water separately and you pour it in and you use loose leaf tea. It's something that I only use when I'm down here in my studio working. And it is kind of an exciting thing. I haven't let myself, though not particularly intentionally, use it outside of this space. I also have some really awesome, tobacco scented candles, which sounds really odd, I'm sure, but I've got some kind of cool things like that I have in my studio space that I don't remove. They're things that are inherent to this space, and they're little things that make it a little bit more exciting and comforting to work in this space. My examples personally probably aren't the best. But if you do have things that you allow yourself to do only when you're working on your art process, especially if it's like a show you're really excited about, though maybe if you're excited about it, you're paying too much attention, but something like that would be really beneficial. I will often put on Lord of the Rings, which I have seen way more times than I could possibly count, on one of my monitors while I'm working on artwork, and I'll just listen to it in the background. I don't do that anymore when I'm doing anything other than art, and so it's kind of an artistic ritual that makes me able to work longer. Doesn't necessarily make it easier for me to dive in, but it makes it easier for me to work for 2 or 3 hours on a project rather than my normal self, which is after half an hour, I'm like fidgety and want to go do something else. It takes a little bit of the need for me to get up and move around and dissipates it, and it allows me to work on the process longer. So consider these kind of things too. What can you allow yourself to do, or what can you reward yourself with in the art making process to where the ritual itself might be tantalizing enough to pull you into making and engaging with your art? Well, the last benefit that I want to talk about here is comfort. And obviously, I've alluded to it with the other three as well. It's incredibly important. Because art is, by its nature, anxiety and stress inducing, sometimes in very small quantities and sometimes in very large quantities, it's key to fight those aspects. And I think one of the best ways you can do that is by making the process more comfortable. If you really think about it, the expectations and potential for disappointment make that situation less comfortable. And so they are then serving as cons, things that pull you away from the desire to make. So if you can do the opposite, if you can bring something in that makes it more comfortable, hopefully you can get back to more of a net neutral, where when you're thinking about the process, your memories and your mind are telling you, it's probably okay. Like, we've got these facets that stress me out a little bit, and we've got these other facets that make it far more comfortable. So much of this and so much of what I talk about in this channel across the board are just strategies to allow you to hopefully engage in your art making process more frequently, then to be more efficient with the time that you put into it, and then lastly, and I think most importantly, to pull more joy from the process. But none of that works or functions or is even worth talking about if you aren't engaging in it in the first place. And so artistic rituals that make it more consistent, that remove these hurdles, that tantalize you, or that make the situation more comfortable are going to be wonderful things that you can apply to hopefully pull you more readily back into the art making process. Well, it seems only logical then to begin at least to go over some examples of what artistic rituals might look like in your life. Obviously, I can't cover all of them because they are going to be as varied as we are from one another. But I am going to touch on some, and I hope that in doing this, that I can help you identify some that you might have in your own life, or begin to craft your own that will be helpful in your particular unique circumstances as a creative individual. I think I'm going to start with a couple subdivided categories here, and for the moment, I'm calling them practical, whimsical, and standard. I know, very original. In the practical realm, I'm going to start with some simple things that might help you get started, and we're going to move on to some more fun ones after this. The first is cleaning up at the beginning of your session. This is something that I mentioned earlier that I often have to do. I wish I could say that I finish cleaning up after the end of each session, but I just don't. I often finish working, even if I feel particularly good or bad about whatever I produced. I will often just disengage and go do something totally different. Now, for me, if I'm really excited to dive into a project and I find that I have cleaning, it can actually be detrimental. But most of the time, especially on Mondays or Tuesday mornings, which is usually when I get started on my art making processes, it's part of my low stress entrance into the process. I will come down, I will clean up my space. I almost always have my headphones in. And basically, it's just less stressful than diving straight in. It gives me something else to invest my time into for a few minutes. So this might be a really lovely routine for you. Of course, the opposite side is also true, cleaning up at the end of that process. For some of us, cleaning up is meditative. It is a reliable act that we can do that allows us to disengage from the thought process that we have to engage in when we're making art. Often we have to make so many decisions as we go about executing a painting or a drawing that when you come to the end and you finish up your session or the actual piece itself, it can often be meditative to spend a couple minutes cleaning things up. Again, I wish I engaged in this, but I know many people that do, that this is a nice wind down to things. Routines, from my perspective, will often happen at the beginning of the process, but they can happen at the end as well. Especially if this sets you up for engaging in your art making whenever you want to, this can be a really good routine. Finding that you have no boundaries when you come back or get very excited to jump into the next thing, your space is clean, your stuff is prepped, and you're ready to work. Supply gathering is another of these fairly practical routines that you can start your art making practice with. This might be getting your drink, your water bottle, or whatever it might be, setting up your supplies, getting your palette put together, finding your reference material, whatever it is that doesn't actually take the place of the art making in that moment. And the reason I mention that is because it's sometimes easy to be distracted by these other things, to feel like you are making progress on your art when in fact you're just gathering reference materials. They're not quite the same thing. It's easy for some of us, myself very much included, to think that the prep work and the practice is actually the art making, and it's not. But it's often less stressful, and so I gravitate toward it. But if you can get all of your materials organized, not cleaning, but getting everything the way that you need to in order to engage in it, it's often really relaxing, and it's kind of a favorable thing to engage in. This could also take the form of mixing up your paints or your colors, figuring out what kind of stuff you want to work with in that moment so that you have all of your materials prepped. This can be a really relaxing and, again, meditative way to engage with things, and can be a lovely ritual to get you started at the beginning of your process. Another that is very practical is clearing away distractions. Maybe this is cleaning, maybe this is prepping, but it's a little bit different. It might be just taking a moment and removing all of the entanglements, all of the things that are going to mess with you or distract you from what you need to engage in. This is something I don't really have to deal with because fortunately I have a separate studio space. But if you don't, if you work at the dining table or you have got little kids and their toys are all over the place, this might be a really good thing to start with, because it can get really frustrating when you sit down to work on your artwork only to find that you've got spilled milk and extra Cheerios and Legos on your workspace. So if you take a few minutes at the beginning and start moving through those things, it can be really beneficial for you. Another, and perhaps the last for these practical ones at the moment, is keeping your phone or tablet out of your space. This isn't necessarily a routine in that it's going to take you a lot of time, but it can be a routine element of the art making process. You get everything set up, you're ready to go, and then you take your phone or whatever people can reach you on and you put it in a different space. This is kind of a big deal because most of us never spend that much time detached from our technology and our tablets and our phones. And so if that's part of your routine, that can actually be good as well. It allows for the flow state to engage more readily because you don't have distractions. No one can reach you by phone or text in that moment, but you're also not tempted to grab that phone and look up something on YouTube or on Instagram. You just don't have that option available to you. This is perhaps a little bit more difficult if you work on digital art exclusively or primarily, because you're working on a platform that allows you to engage in those things. I don't have a great solution for that, but if you do, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Let's move then into some more whimsical things. I don't have a better name for this category, but basically these are the things that are fun. They're exciting, they're not necessarily art related, they're not really practical like cleaning, but they're still going to be good routines. This is going to be the category that could expand and balloon the most, and while I have just a few examples here, if you're listening to this and any occur to you, please share them. That would be lovely to hear. The first thing, and this is something that I've heard from a lot of people, is setting yourself up with a nice drink. In a lot of other sessions, this would actually be like food too, but most of us don't eat while we're art making. So maybe brew yourself a special kind of tea. If you're meeting out somewhere like a coffee shop, get a special drink and sit down. If you've got, if you really enjoy boba and you've got a local place you can grab that might be a good thing. Boba weirds me out. I don't like stuff in my drinks. It's just, I don't even like orange juice with a lot of pulp. But I know a lot of people love those kind of things. If you attach a fancy drink, something delicious, something that is special that you only get to engage in when you make art, you are kind of training your brain that there's a physical reward for the art making process. And yes, like I mentioned earlier, this is kind of like training puppies, but that's kind of okay. Like everybody loves dogs, right? So if you can set up something special like that, it's going to create this link in your mind that makes the art making more pleasurable. But the biggest thing here is it's just going to allow you to engage a little bit more easily and make it a little bit more fun to engage. I often work with a cup of coffee. Like I mentioned, I don't usually do something special, but sometimes I'll get myself a Coke, which I don't drink a lot of carbonated things. I'm not really supposed to. But sometimes I'll make special tea. Sometimes I'll do some other things. I've ordered some really awesome teas before. I have this green Rice Krispie tea, which was lovely, and a lavender tea. I really like tea. I lived in England for a time when I was growing up, and my mom actually has some English ancestry, and so I had tea in small amounts in my baby bottle. It was just part of what I grew up with. Whether that's good for me or not, I don't know, but tea has just been an integral part of my life for ages, and I really enjoy it. I drink it less than I should because it has to be tended. But that specialness, the fact that you have to stop for a few minutes and make that, is the actual routine. And so if you can engage in something like that, pave the way for the art making process to be a little bit more pleasurable and have these kind of fun, delicious things linked to it, it's going to make it easier to slide into your art making. This could be choosing specific music that you really enjoy. Maybe music that you only listen to when you're art making. For me, this takes the form of using a record player and actually listening to vinyl, which is something that I can't do right now because I accidentally burned out my record player. But I know a lot of people enjoy special kinds of music, listening to it in a fairly unique fashion. And so maybe it is. Maybe it's getting a record and putting it on, or putting on an album and listening to it start to finish. There are specific bands that I basically only listen to when I'm making art or when I'm writing. And the nice part for me is my sessions are usually about 45 minutes to an hour because I just work best in about that increment of time. And the nice part is most albums are about that long. So it's nice when you kind of come up on the last song. I feel like my brain kind of disengages for a moment. It's like, oh, we're almost at the end, and you can push through. It also gives me the ability to roughly gauge how long I've been working on a particular thing. So sometimes it can be music like that, setting up something specific. It could be going and sitting outside, working in a space that is not normal, not your normal workspace at least. Not like it's a really weird space, but it could be that. For some of us, it's going to be going and sitting in a coffee shop, walking down to the river or to the park and working there. If it's something that makes the process more enjoyable or special, and it is particularly and specifically linked to your art making process, I think it can qualify as an art making routine in this way. I've tried this before. I have too many things I have to process when I'm outside trying to work on artwork. It's like if there is the wind, I don't deal with the sun well. I sound really complainy here, but mostly I'm a creature of habit. And so I like working in the same space all the time, but I am not the norm. I know a lot of students that I had over the years and a lot of friends I have that are artists who love painting outdoors, who love working in public spaces. It makes it more exciting for them because it's different than sitting at home and working in your sketchbook or in a dark corner of your basement somewhere. I like the dark corner of the basement, but not everybody does. We are not all the same. I've said it before a lot on this channel, but artists are not a monolith. We are very different one to another. So if mixing up your space is going to make that special for you, it's going to be a routine that you can set up that allows you to engage in things more easily, then I would encourage you to set up that routine. This last one on the whimsical side is kind of goofy, but it comes from a practical place, and that would be like dressing for the occasion. And yes, I literally mean like the clothes you're putting on. This comes from the idea that if you allow yourself the time to get ready, to dress for whatever occasion it is that you are attending to, your brain is almost tricked a little bit into formalizing yourself. If I'm working at home and I'm just working in my pajamas all day, it's almost subconsciously that my brain goes, oh, like we're relaxed, we're chill right now. But if I get up and I have to do some professional work and so I dress nicely, I don't know if it's the process of getting ready, that routine in of itself, or actually like sitting there in the clothes that are maybe a little bit less comfortable, but they trick you into that mindset. But there's something to be said for that. So as an artist, if you get up and you put on things that, are exciting and interesting to you, if you put on your jewelry, if you put on your makeup, whatever it is that kind of makes you feel arty, artistic, a little bit avant-garde, whatever that is, that might not be a bad strategy. There are certain pieces of clothing that I wear when I'm painting, obviously to like keep my nicer clothing from getting dirty. But there's something practical about that too. I have a tendency to do that and then be like, well, I'm already in these clothes. Like I might as well just keep going for a while. I don't want to waste the time that I spent getting ready. And there's something to that. Again, this is not going to apply to everyone, but if you feel like a routine like this could apply to you, then maybe give it a try. You'll never know. My wife works from home and she has made the decision over the last couple years to dress professionally every day, even if she's not going to be on a call where people are going to see her. And the reason is pretty simple. She said that she feels better about herself and she feels more professional when she's dressed as if she was going into the office. And this is something that's not going to be the same for everyone, but for some of us, and maybe for you, it's going to be a strategy and a routine that might help you engage in your artwork in a better, more solid fashion. I just realized the obvious pun about the fact that fashion is tied into things you're wearing. That was not intentional, but it's kind of funny right now. So logically, being me, I have to move into the dangers of engaging in these kinds of routines. And while artistic rituals can be wonderful, as with most things, they have some potential downsides. It is easy for the ritual itself to become the source of your enjoyment, and while this is not a terrible thing on its own, it can distract from the art, if that's your true purpose. And I kind of alluded to this earlier when I mentioned practice and how practice has been a hurdle for me in the past. It's fairly easy if you set up an artistic routine to engage and then over-engage in that routine, to expand what was maybe supposed to be 5 minutes at the beginning of your process into 20 or 30 or an hour. And all of a sudden, you're an hour into your quote-unquote artistic routine and you haven't actually made any art yet. I think that's probably the biggest danger that comes up with this kind of thing, is just falling for that trap. Because our brains are often going to try to take the path of least resistance. That's actually the whole point of setting up the routine. But the art is generally going to have more resistance in and of itself than a fun or jovial routine that we set up. So it's not that difficult to see that your routine of making your special cup of coffee or your special tea, which took a few minutes and now it's getting more elaborate, and now you're doing more and more interesting things, and all of a sudden your hour and a half that you had to make art is being more and more consumed by the routine that was just supposed to get you into the art making process in the moment. And so this is something to remain aware of. We have a tendency to accidentally trick ourselves into feeling like we've been productive when we haven't been, and this is not an exception to that. This is something that can very easily be a pitfall for us as artists, certainly one that I have fallen into before. Additionally, you can fall into the trap of thinking you need the ritual. And for some of you listening right now, that might be you. That you feel like your art process is fairly mundane and you're like, yes, I can put in these things that make me feel more like an artist. And the reality is these are just tools to help those of us who need to engage in our art and want to engage in it more readily to do so. You don't need a ritual. The ritual itself is not important. The art is. The ritual is just a segue into that. It's an avenue to allow you to attach to it more easily and readily. So don't fall into the trap of thinking that the ritual itself is important. If you're hearing this and feeling like, well, now I need to go find a ritual that works for me and I'm going to try all of these out, you're probably missing the point. And maybe you don't need one at all. I think they're important because in my experience, so many artists have a desire to craft and to create. And that desire is never fulfilled in the way that they want because art making is hard, because life has a lot of distractions, because time is low. Most of us don't have as much time as we would like to engage in these processes. And often if you come home from work and it was a stressful day and you really want to put that hour into your artwork, the art being stressful too can keep you from engaging in it. And so the hope is that these kind of rituals allow in that moment to be like WD-40 or oil, to allow you to move more smoothly from one thing into another. But they by themselves are not important. They are important only in so much as they allow you to move into the art making process. I think sometimes, especially with YouTube stuff these days, artistic lifestyles tend to seem glamorous. And there's a lot of people on this platform and on Instagram that really make it seem that way. All of the stuff that is shared, though, is highly, highly curated. The life of an artist is, by and large, mundane. We spend so much of our time working on sketches and studying and practicing things, and then we execute a piece. And if somebody only shows like the beginning of the piece and the end of the piece, you're missing out on hours of prep work. You're missing out on all of the psychological, trauma halfway through. You're like, is this good enough? Am I really going to achieve it? And then, being satisfied with it and coming back and looking at it 6 days later and going, oh my goodness, why did I think this was good? Why did I share this with anyone? None of that stuff is shown in social media. And the artistic life is just not altogether glamorous. It's pretty simple. Making a painting takes a long amount of time, and mixing colors takes a long amount of time, and prepping things and sketching things and letting individual layers of ink dry takes a lot of time. Those pieces aren't shared. And so sometimes when we see other artists' artistic routines online, they can feel exciting and glamorous. And I think there's often this sense that, like, yes, this thing will help. This will be the key, the secret to making my art better, and my process is, no longer having any friction at all. It'll be a frictionless thing. And like, there is no secret ingredient. Art making is just kind of work, and it's hard a lot of the time. There's no secret ingredient. The artistic routine is not going to do that for you. So be careful not to think that any of these individual things are going to just randomly and magically fix whatever it is that you want fixed in your art making process. I wish I had that thing, but I don't think it exists. And that's part of the reason why art making is so beautiful and wonderful, is that it's just hard work. Like, there's no magic behind it. Well, I mean, there's a crazy amount of magic behind it, but there's no magic that makes it easier for people to do it. Art by its nature is magic, but that might be its own other episode. Well, as for my thoughts on the topic, I think that you've gotten bits and pieces of this throughout. I will often clean up as I begin to work on my artwork. It's part of my routine. I'm almost always listening to something on my headphones while I do that, so it's just low stress. And sometimes when I'm working on art, especially stressful art, or if I'm recording it, my heart rate does increase. And this is something that I've had to deal with. I've gone to the doc about it before, because stress and anxiety makes my heart rate increase. And when I have these routines that are pretty simple and known, and like success is really easily gauged, then I'm less stressed when I get into my artwork. So for me, that kind of thing is really beneficial. Like I mentioned, I like having something warm to sip on, particularly for those moments when you like make a mark and you're not sure what to do next. Then I like to be able to sip on something while I'm kind of mentally processing, what do I need to do. I like to draw in a new space. As much as I have a great little studio space here in the basement, I like drawing at the dining room table. I like drawing sometimes at coffee shops and things. So I like mixing it up every once in a while. But that's like 15% of the time, if even that amount. But whatever gets me kind of working is what I will do for a period of time. Sometimes I will find a new brand of video on YouTube, and I use that as an excuse. Like, oh, I've got this new, Nuzlocke that I'm going to watch. And so I'm going to sit down and draw for an hour because that's how long the video is. But primarily for me, it's cleaning and doing mundane tasks at the beginning so that there's no stress heading directly into the art making process. Well, as always, thanks for being here. I hope this video was beneficial to you in some way, and I would love to hear from you in the comments below about your thoughts about the topic, or any topics you would like to hear about in future videos. Thank you to my patrons who are on the screen right now. If you want to check out the Patreon or the Discord, you can feel free to do so. They are linked in the description below. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.